Right, hello. So my name's Jeremy Basckin. I'm going to be taking you through what the next industrial revolution and the digital supply chain might look like. I recognize I'm standing between you and leaving, or you and the bar. So also I'll try and make it a little bit interactive. So I'm going to ask you some questions. So just be prepared to raise your hands or stand up. So what we're going to cover today is a little bit of an introduction about me. Who am I? The changing world that is we're going through, evolution, what's important, the digital impact, and also some key considerations as we take the digital journey. So my name's Jeremy Basckin, as I said. I call myself a waste warrior. I hate inefficiencies. And that's all what I've been doing my whole life, is driving inefficiencies and trying to make things better. I spent 25 years with Unilever, and the last 6 of those years I was responsible for sales and operations planning, which encompassed demand planning, supply planning, and business planning, and setting the standards and then rolling it out and executing across 140 countries. So that kept me busy for a while, and it also helped drive the maturity of Unilever to where it is today. I then joined Johnson & Johnson and headed up the supply chain for EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And again, had responsibility for the customer-facing, as well as the supply chain and the factories, and the sales and operations planning process. And then I spent some time with Coca-Cola, looking after this end-to-end supply chain. So it was 6 factories, 10 distribution centers, cold drinks operations, so it's all the coolers and cabinets out in the trade, and planning as well. And now I've left all of them, and I've started a business called Supply Chain Practice, which we help businesses improve operational performance and also automate processes. Okay. So I spent some time last year with the head of Google for Europe. And the first thing he said to me, he said, today is the day that you will feel the least amount of change. It's just exponential from here onwards. And we need to get used to it, because that's going to become the norm. And if we have a look at companies, so I've used an example here from the US. And the reason why I've used the US as an example is the US is the biggest country in terms of GDP by a long way. They run about 12 trillion GDP. The next biggest is China, which is 4 trillion. So they're 3 times bigger than the smallest one. And if you go back 100 years, 1917, you'll see there's lots of steel and industrial manufacturers on the top 10. If you go back 50 years ago, you'll find that, okay, IBM is up there, but also you find players like Kodak, General Motors, Polaroid in the top 10. A lot of them aren't around anymore. And last year, the top 10, the first 5 places was Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, all IT-based businesses. So as we're seeing, the world is changing incredibly quickly. They say that by 2030, 70% of the current FTSE 100 companies will no longer be on the FTSE 100. So if we don't change, we're not going to be around. If we talk about how people communicate, that has had a complete mind shift in the last few years. So if you talk about emails, what percentage of emails do you think are opened?
Me personally, 10%.
10%? Okay, good guess. 22% of emails on average are opened. Live messaging. What percentage of live messages do you think are opened? 70. 98%. Okay, so the way that people communicate and interact with each other is very different. I don't know if there's anyone from Vodafone here. There we go. If you start, I've got 2 teenage, a son and a daughter. And in order that they have efficient contracts, we have unlimited data, sorry, not unlimited phone calls, unlimited text, and 5 gig of data. When it comes to about 3 weeks into the month, they're begging for more data. They've used their 5 gigs of data. When you get their monthly bill and have a look what they've spent in phone calls, maybe 1 or 2, text, maybe 1, but it's all about the data and how they communicate with each other and how they use technology. I think YouTube is one of the big ones that they use. But if we go back to live messaging, the 2 biggest live messaging is currently WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. So the 2 of them account for around about 60 to 70% of the total market of messages. Do you know how many messages just went through those 2 last year? 25 billion. Good start. Higher. Any more takers? 60 billion. Okay. So that's a lot of messages. But as you can start to see, the way that people communicate and work with each other is significantly changing. If we talk about the industrial revolutions that we've been through, Industrial 1.0, steam, water power, the 1900s, mass production, electricity, 2000s, digital networks, robotics, and IT systems. And what do we have today, which they're actually putting a date around about 2016, Industry 4.0 started, effectively, was about autonomous machines and cyber systems. So as we can see, we're progressing. So let's just understand what does that mean from a systems landscape for ourselves. We started off putting ERP systems 10 or 15 years ago. What happened is when we started putting in these ERP systems, what did we need? All of a sudden, we had a system, and a system doesn't just, you put it in and work. You have to tell it what to do and how to work. So all of a sudden, businesses had these ERP systems that they know and they needed to put in. How were they going to make it work? They needed processes. Did businesses have processes? Majority not. So what happened was they used the process that the ERP system said they should be using. And lo and behold, not a lot of people are making full utilizations of the ERP systems. So if I just ask the room over here, who has an ERP system that uses APS, so Advanced Planning Systems? So something like SAP APO. Okay? So you have it. How many of those people who have it use that as the only source? They don't have any spreadsheets in the background that they're putting the input information. Okay. So all we're doing is we're using ERP as a data tool because the reason why is ERP doesn't allow for any workarounds. So how do you get the workarounds? Well, you put it into spreadsheets. And when you get the number you want, you need to feed it into the number. So we start off with ERP systems. We start off with processes that we have in our business that's not fit for our business. And now we want to go on the next venture, okay, which is technology. So now we want to collect big data. We want to get into the cloud. And we're starting to struggle with that because we don't have the underpinning processes. And we're moving into the next league. What's happening on top of the technology is the next revolution, which is automation. So I just want to share a video with you, and then we can talk about it. So what is automation?
This video provides a short introduction into how software robots work. Robots talk to applications like Oracle, SAP, Salesforce, and others and tell them what to do. The way they do the talking makes a big difference to the level of robotic automation that can be achieved. There are 2 methods that robots can use to communicate with applications. They can use the user interface. This means the robot mimics a user. Here, each robot uses its own desktop to communicate with the application. 1,000 robots need 1,000 desktop sessions. This way of communication is called analog robotics and relies on the functionality of first-generation robots. The other method is through the use of application programmable interfaces. Here, the robot talks directly to applications, no desktop sessions are needed, and scalability presents no overhead. This method is called digital robotics, utilizing next or second-generation robots. Using analog robotics or digital robotics is dictated by the applications that you want the robot to control. If the application has no defined APIs, then you have to use analog robotics. This is often the case with legacy and home-built applications. If, however, the application has defined APIs, as is almost always the case with modern packaged applications and services, digital robotics has clear advantages. So, what are those advantages, and how does the robot know what to do in a process? To answer that question, we first need to define a robot. A robot contains a set of instructions to complete a specific process. Robots are data-driven, which means they need input data to perform a set of instructions. How the robots are provided with that data makes a big difference to robot deployment efficiencies and how they benefit an organization. Robots that need humans to initiate them, as in a front office or service desk environment, have a limited effect on productivity. They simply help the user perform a limited set of repetitive tasks that are typically a subset of wider processes. They work in a serial fashion, one at a time. As such, typical improvements in productivity are reported to be in the 10 to 30% range. Digital robots that are initiated by other digital robots and find their own input data can work autonomously, have a greater impact on productivity levels, and can robotize complex processes. Plus, they can scale and perform as many parallel processes required to carry out a task. The only time that a digital robot involves a human is when a judgment or approval is required. These digital robots, which run autonomously, provide the highest gains in productivity and reduction in labor cost. Typical improvements in productivity are reported in the 70 to 100% range. Robotics is not a one-size-fits-all solution, so it's imperative you understand the benefits and shortcomings of each solution and realize that not all robots are created equal.
Okay, so one of the biggest challenges that we find with automation is having robots. What do robots do? You define a set of rules that robots follow. Okay? Robots cannot create their own rules. They can only follow rules, and sometimes they're able to learn rules. The problem being is those rules are created within processes. And if you don't have optimized processes, then trying to do automation just falls over. So when I work with a client or work with people, the biggest challenge that we have and where you spend the most time is defining the process that you want your organization to run and how you can improve that process, and then you can only start working on some of those solutions. The next big one we always hear about is AI, artificial intelligence. So what is artificial intelligence? This is when the robot can start creating its own rules. So it can start defining rules that it can work at. And that's when it starts getting scary. But what we're starting to see is 90 to 95% of applications can follow rules. There's a 5% that needs to define what those rules are. Okay, so how do we build maturity in an organization? We always try and, you need to have the basics in place when you run an operation, which is about having the visibility. Once you have the visibility, then it's about integrating things together, so we all start working together. Then we can start predicting, and finally we can start shaping. So when we start looking at the applications and the solutions that we want, always start with visibility. Don't go to predictability or shaping first. Start with this. Ensure that you have your KPIs in place, you're able to measure it, you've got the data behind it, you understand your exceptions, so therefore as a business you know exactly what has happened or what happened as the starting point. Because if you're trying to do something on top when you don't know what's happened, well, how do you know what you're doing? The second thing is integrating. So integrating your strategies. What you typically find is you have a business strategy, a planning strategy, a manufacturing strategy, a distribution strategy that are all doing their own thing and they're not aligned to each other. The manufacturing strategy is about long runs. That's how your equipment is set up. Your planning strategy is about small batches, can't work with the long runs. Your business strategy is about bespoke. And then your delivery strategy is day one for day 4, when the requirements of the business strategy is day 1 for day 1. So, you need to align those strategies. You need to be clear about what your policies are, that they're aligned, so your safety, stock, and service policies. Having your processes in place, very clear on what your processes are, and I call S&OP one of those processes, and aligned goals and KPIs. If you don't have aligned goals and KPI, it doesn't work. And then you can start talking about why did it happen. And then you start predicting. So things that you use, tools that you use for predicting is sensing, analytics, collaborating with customers, understanding your key drivers as well. So why did those things happen? If you understand the key drivers, then you can start predicting what is most likely to happen. And therefore, you can get into the conversation is what will happen. And then shaping. So starting to use your scenarios, you're orchestrating. So when you start orchestrating between internally and externally, between your suppliers and also your customers. And then you can start shaping, how can I make it happen? So these are all the important things to think about, because when I start working, a lot of businesses I work with and I've been within, we start thinking about, we need scenario planning to solve everything. Let's start on the scenario planning. But we don't even know what the data or the KPIs are, or we don't understand what our exceptions are. So hopefully that just helps you understand how you should be building your maturity within your business. So this was an interesting survey that was done. So 2016 global survey of most of the supply chains across the globe, leadership, so chief supply chain officers and vice presidents. And this is ranked in importance, what they said, the most important thing. So the most important thing that came out was integrating supply chain strategy with the business strategy. Okay, basics. Applying S&OP throughout the business, because it's not still working. Supply chain segmentation, understanding agility versus efficiency. Supply chain performance management and KPIs. Supplier management. So these are all the basic foundations of the business, and this is what is keeping the supply chain leaders up at night, because they're worried that the basics aren't in place. And then we start getting on to talk about, okay, some of the new things that are coming. So digitalization, cooperation with channels, partners, suppliers. This is the very one. How do we maintain the talent pool in the supply chain organization? Because always when someone becomes good or seen as a rising star, they tend to disappear out of the supply chain, out of the organization. Customer-facing supply chain, and then at the bottom, big data. So there's still a lot to do on the basics. So let's just understand some of the digital technology that's out there that we're currently using, and some of it we're still struggling with it. So if you go back, warehousing 15 years ago had lights-out operation, fully automated warehouses where you could, 300 miles away, you could decide, I want this product to go to this place, and it would automatically go and pick it out of the warehouse and put it down nicely for the vehicle to come and pick it up and take it away. And I think there's a lot of good work that's gone with the automatic stacking and cranes that are available. Available to promise, so using that within your system, how good you are at promising your product in terms of what you currently have. MRP, I think, a long time ago, trying to run that manually was a difficult thing. I think most businesses hopefully are running MRP. Is anyone still running MRP manually? Materials resource planning. Okay, good. No-touch forecasting. So what you find is if you've got high volume, low volatility that can be statistically, you can start using your statistical tools not to touch your forecast anymore. Is anyone using no-touch forecasting for the segmented? There we go. We've got a couple. 80% no touch. Okay. Good, good. Production optimizer. Control towers. And then we start getting into the big data and analytics, which I know is emerging, but there's still things to do, and then demand sensing. Is anyone using demand sensing? No, okay. It's a still growing phase. I mean, I was in an organization where we used demand sensing, and what you found was that your first 2 weeks, week 1 and week 2, demand sensing is most probably 50% more accurate than what people can do, because it's effectively a black box. But then when you start getting into week 3 and week 4, then it becomes equal and a par, and as you go further out, forecasting is far, far better, but it's a way to control the short term. On top of that, we're starting to see all the emerging trends coming. So the using of cloud to collaborate with our customers, with our suppliers, and various elements. We're starting to see 3D printing coming through. Transportation is the big buzzword at the moment. There's a huge groundswell of what's going on in transportation, not only on the drones, but also coming from the way that networks run. Uber is now starting its own startup transportation, so you can bid straight away. If I want to take goods from point 1 to 2, I can go into an app and I can get a price straight away, and I can get someone to come and collect it. There's 3 or 4 new startups that have started up in very similar ways that you can start bidding directly for your transportation. So you're going to see a huge shift. But one of the biggest problems with transportation at the moment is truck drivers. In the USA, the biggest problem is there are not enough truck drivers. And the reason being is nobody grows up to be a truck driver. And what they're finding is the age of the truck drivers are all 50 plus, and there's no new truck drivers coming through, and there's a huge shortage of actually moving things around. That's why, trucks, automated trucks are starting to come on the agenda, and we're going to see more and more of that. We're starting to see in Europe as well that. So in the UK, I think the average age of a truck driver is, I think, 48 years old at the moment. Yes, and nobody's coming through. So you're starting to see these trends emerging. So how do you solve those trends? Well, you start automating them and finding different solutions to do that. So that area is just going to grow at the moment. Deployment and allocations, people deciding which product needs to be sent to which place, allocating the stock and doing it. A lot of that's done manually. We're starting to see more and more automation now starting to happen, which is a lot more efficient because machines can do it a lot more effectively. Block and chain, I know it's a buzzword, but there's also good places where to use block and chain and where not to use block and chain. A very good example is the block and chain works that you move from area to area to area. And what happens is that block effectively retains its knowledge. And it's very useful if you're doing things like tracking products or doing financials, because it doesn't change. That's the product, and that sits within the block, and therefore the information can be found very quickly. It's very difficult to change. If you want to do a change, it's very difficult, so it's not as adaptable, as flexible as we think it. And there's a fantastic case study from Walmart, who are renowned for their ability to track their products. They had an example. They wanted to track a mango from a store. Where did it come? Which farm did that mango come from? And it took them, using their systems, they were able to do it. It took them 6 days, 18 hours, and I don't know how many minutes, but 6 days, 18 hours. They put it into the blockchain, and they spent their whole chain, how they put all their miners and how they set up that blockchain. And now, in order to do that same transactions, takes 2.2 seconds. So we're starting to see, using that technology, what it's good for, and finance data it's also good for, but then it has its limitations. We're starting to see the omni-channel growing, but that comes with its problems as well. If you look at a normal retail operation, retail operations are making a margin in the region of 3 to 4%. Omni-channels are making the region of about 1%. So Arcadia is one of the textbooks which they look at when they start looking at that. So it comes with its problems that, okay, more goes through the omni-channel. It creates us a nightmare as a supply chain because there's, the lead times need to come down, but also they want to know where their stock is, as well, on top of that, you're fighting the cost element, so you can't really charge them for the extra service that you're getting. Robotic automation. I talked a little bit about the robotic organization, but it's understanding how you use a robot and how do you automate it. So there's two levels of automation. There's an automation where a mistake is not a problem, and there's an automation where making a mistake is the end of the world. And to give you some examples, call centers. There's a call center from a mobile phone company that's automated their call center. So if you phone in and say, I need to get a new SIM, I've lost my SIM, or I've moved from one phone to another phone and I need a different SIM, you would used to phone in that call center and say, hi, my name is XYZ, John Smith. Where do you live? What's your account number? How long have you been a customer for? Just hold on. The person will go and have a look at some data. Let me check if you paid up all your bills. Let me check that what your history is and all the rest. They've now automated that. So when you phone up, you give them your name. That automation piece automatically picks up your data, knows where your bills are, doesn't ask you all the questions. It will say, oh, I see you're high usage. Not a problem. We will, because you've been such a loyal customer, actually we'll give you free texts for the next month, and your SIM will be in the post and with you tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? It doesn't arrive. So phone's back. Oh, we're terribly sorry. It will be 2 or 3 days' time. So therefore, if that first message goes in, it's not a problem. The other ones where it becomes not an option to make a mistake is when you're starting to use the automation to doing your financials. So if I'm a CEO and I'm going to the stock market because I now need to report my month end or quarter end or year end, I need the financials, which are, a lot of that is generated automatically. If I get those figures wrong, I'll wipe out 50% of the business on the stock exchange. So therefore, that is not an option. So there's levels of automation that you need to go through of what you need, and there's also costs that come with that. So you just need to think that through. And there's also the artificial intelligence, which is where do you use artificial intelligence? Where do you want robots to actually start creating the rules? And we need to think about how we best use that. So that just gives you an idea of the impact and emerging and the effect that it has on. But what we forget about is we always talk about the technology. We don't talk about the people. And what we're finding is the leadership and our teams, the supply chain, need to fundamentally change. We cannot manage and lead the way we currently lead at the moment. If you have a look at the required skills, you need to be functionally strong, cost-focused. It's all about cost minimization, supply chain excellence, focused on execution. It's very internally focused, very functionally focused, and it strives to eliminate and simplify complexity. But the world that we've now moved into, this world is no longer here. We're in the new world. The new world says, as a supply chain, cross-boundary coordinate. You need to coordinate things across boundaries. You need to be talking about outcomes and revenue. It's not about operational efficiency. It's really about that. It's about business excellence. It's not about supply chain excellence. It's about the total business. We need to be asking the right questions, and we need to be more focused on the outside, focus on the customer. I'm sure we've heard that a lot today, but focusing on the outside and bringing it in instead of inside out. How we communicate, and we also need to accept complexity and eliminate unnecessary complications. So it's a very different skill set that we need to start developing. And we need to think about how do we develop our skill set and how do we develop our people's skill set to make that move. If we also try and understand the adoption of technology, McKinsey have done a survey saying that 45% of the current processes and things that we do in business today can be automated. So there's a huge amount to go after. And if we look at about how much has been automated already, you can see that the front office with the sales and the way that we do things is at the moment around about 40% automated. Finance is about 30%, HR is 10%, supply chain is only about 10%. So the next major drive is going to be supply chain, whether we like it or not. Okay. So what I wanted to do is to talk about some key considerations here. Because there's a lot that you've heard today, and there's a lot that's been going on today. But we need to make sure that you're all geared and have some of the fundamentals in place. So the first thing would be, if it was me, I'll be asking the question, how do I improve and create robust processes? Because that's where I'd like to start. As you've seen, if you haven't got that, then you're not using your ERP systems, and we've got all workarounds. How do we create processes that we can start using our ERP system, so we can start using our technology, so we can start using automation? So that's where I would start with, is really understanding how can I improve my processes. The next thing I would say is, how do we establish that new leadership mindset? What are those things that we need to be doing or changing in terms of being a leader in the supply chain? I think this is really important, is, what are we trying to do within the business? So what are those business drivers are we trying to improve? And what is the right solution? So I had a conversation with a person 4 months ago, and they asked me, do you know of a cloud-based system that we can, this is a global manufacturer, that we can see all our factories around the world, operational efficiency, in an instance? So I asked them, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that? Well, we need to be making some decisions. Okay, so do you need it on an hourly basis? What is the frequency that you need it on? If you look at what L'Oreal has done, L'Oreal had a system in place in 2004 where they were able to look at all the operational efficiencies on a weekly basis or monthly basis across all their plants, which they used to bring into their main business to understand where the capacity constraints are, where we need decisions, where we might be having issues, where we should be making investments. Similarly, Unilever had a similar system in place in 2009, and that was driving those decisions. So when I started drilling down, it was exactly for the same reasons. What they wanted to do is they needed that information because if they had an issue in a factory, they might have a service issue. But that's for the business to try and manage, and that's why you have safety stock. Then the question was, okay, well, I need it because we need to make some investment decisions, because if our factories are running inefficiency, I'd rather drive efficiencies in it than try and build another factory. Okay, well, you don't need it on an hourly basis. So just think about what problems are you trying to solve? And then once you've defined what is that problem you're trying to solve, what is the right solution? I think the big issue is, okay, once you've decided it, how do you build the business case for that? Because there's a lot of cost that's involved, there's a lot of stakeholders involved, and it becomes very difficult. And then the fifth biggest thing is, how do you overcome that change? The organization, inertia, and how do you scale it up across the business? So that was a quick overview on, what the digital is doing, how people are using it, and some of the thoughts and considerations that you should put in place before you embark, or you've already embarked on your journey. So thank you, and are there any questions?